Welcome back to Old Hollywood Story. Today, we descend into the basements of the Golden Age to see how the brightest and most miserable star in history was created, Judy Garland. The entire world remembers her as the innocent Dorothy, walking the yellow brick road. But behind that smile lay a tragedy that began long before she set foot on the MGM lot. Today, we pull back the curtain on a story where there was no magic, only cold calculation and the betrayal of those closest to her. Frances Gumm, whom the world would know as Judy Garland, did not choose the stage. The stage was chosen for her by her mother, Ethel Gumm. She was a woman whose ambitions knew no bounds and whose heart was made of flint. Ethel saw her daughters not as children, but as lottery tickets. Judy was barely 2 years old when her mother first pushed her onto a movie theater stage. While other children played with dolls, little Frances was memorizing lines and dance steps under the harsh supervision of a woman she would later call the real Witch of Oz. Ethel was the first dealer in Judy's life. To keep the child from being fussy and to ensure she could perform for hours, her mother began giving her pills. At first, they were innocent-looking energy pills, followed by sedatives so the child could fall asleep instantly after a show. This began when Judy was only 4. Her biochemistry was hijacked before she even learned to read. Her mother instilled a terrifying belief in her. You are only loved when you sing. Without applause, Judy felt like a nobody. At 13, Judy's fate was final. Ethel placed her daughter at MGM, the greatest dream factory, which was actually a factory for processing human destinies. The studio didn't just sign a talented girl, they bought her entirely. Hollywood didn't get an actress, it acquired live cargo, a slave with no right to an opinion, no right to rest, and no right to her own body. Louis B. Mayer, the head of the studio, treated Judy like a prize horse. From day one, they began fixing her. She was told her nose was too big, her teeth were uneven, and her figure was a disaster. At 13, she was forced into the girl next door image, the sweet child who would never grow up. But behind the scenes of this sweetness was a brutal regime. The studio controlled her every breath. Ethel Gumm, instead of protecting her daughter, became Mayer's ally. She ensured Judy never missed her medication and dared not complain of exhaustion. Her family sold her into a golden cage, where the walls were made of contracts, and instead of air, there was the smoke of cheap cigarettes and an amphetamine fog. Judy Garland never knew what it was like to be a teenager. She had no proms, no first dates, no secrets with friends. Her world was the soundstage, and her friends were the gaffers and makeup artists. She was a hostage to her talent, which became her curse. By the time she filmed The Wizard of Oz, Judy was already a deeply addicted person, though legally still a child. This block is just the beginning of her descent into the abyss. We see the birth of an icon, but in reality, we are witnessing the destruction of a person. Hollywood was preparing its ultimate masterpiece, oblivious to the fact that the material for this masterpiece was a living human soul. Judy stood on the threshold of ultimate fame, unaware that the yellow brick road would lead her straight into a hell from which she would never escape. If the first block was about family betrayal, the second is about industrial sadism. Welcome behind the scenes of MGM, where movie magic was crafted in apothecary labs. As soon as Judy Garland signed her contract, she ceased to belong to herself. The studio turned her life into a strictly calibrated chemical schedule. To ensure the girl next door always looked energetic, radiant, and ready to sing, they put her on a euphoria cocktail. Every morning began not with breakfast, but with a handful of amphetamines. These pills raced her heart to the limit, forcing a 13-year-old girl to work to exhaustion when her biological clock demanded rest. This was the foundation of her future demise, laid by the hands of those who called themselves her mentors. The filming schedule at MGM was merciless. Judy worked 18 and sometimes 20 hours a day. In those rare moments when the stimulants wore off and she literally fainted from exhaustion right on the set, the system did not falter. Instead of sending the child home, they summoned the studio doctors. These were men in white coats who served not the Hippocratic Oath, but Louis B. Mayer's prophets. They gave her injections right through her stage costume, another dose of fuel, and pushed her back under the scorching spotlights. Judy sang about rainbows while barely able to stand, her pupils dilated from the chemicals her young body couldn't process. This wasn't show business, it was legalized torture of a teenager, masked by the glamour of Hollywood. But the most terrifying part of the chemical prison began after the command cut. Judy's nervous system, accelerated by amphetamines, could not relax. She would return to her hotel room or trailer, but her eyes wouldn't close. Her brain continued to vibrate with artificial energy. That's when the second part of the MGM plan kicked in: barbiturates. The studio issued her heavy sedatives to forcibly shut her down for 3 or 4 hours. It was an endless pendulum between an artificial high and a medicated crash. Judy's body became a battlefield. She grew accustomed to her feelings and emotions being regulated by pills, joy by schedule, sleep by command. By age 17, Judy Garland was the most famous teenager in the world, and simultaneously the most severe drug addict in Hollywood. MGM had created the perfect screen soldier who never complains, but the price was exorbitant. She began to suffer from paranoia and drastic mood swings. When she tried to refuse the pills, she faced a harsh withdrawal, which the studio branded as diva tantrums. Mayer and his inner circle set a precedent that would later kill Marilyn Monroe and Elvis Presley. But Judy was the first. She was the laboratory specimen of how far a corporation could go in its quest to squeeze everything out of human talent. In this block, we see not success, but the start of a long decay, where behind every high note hid a chemical cry for help that no one wanted to hear. If you thought the pills were Judy's only nightmare, you underestimate the cruelty of Louis B. Mayer. The head of MGM had a sadistic habit. He loved to strike where it hurt most, her self-esteem. Despite Judy bringing millions to the studio, Mayer never called her by name. To him, she was "my little hunchback." He constantly compared her to the studio's recognized beauties, Elizabeth Taylor and Lana Turner. In the eyes of the bosses, Judy was merely a talented freak whose natural curves were viewed as a defect. At 14, the girl was brainwashed into believing she was hideous, and that voice of Mayer in her head never went silent until the final day of her life. To force Judy to fit the screen image of the eternal child, the studio implemented a regime that today would be called torture. While her co-stars on The Wizard of Oz enjoyed full lunches, Judy was served only a cup of clear chicken broth and black coffee without sugar. This was her sole diet for months on end. But the most horrific part was the method the studio used to suppress her hunger. MGM minders forced her to smoke up to 80 cigarettes a day. The smoke was meant to trick her stomach and the nicotine to bolster the effect of the amphetamines. Imagine this surreal nightmare. Little Dorothy, in her blue dress, the symbol of purity and innocence, sitting in a corner of the soundstage between takes, choking on tobacco smoke just to avoid fainting from hunger before the camera. The control over her body was total. Studio dietitians weighed her several times a day. Every extra pound became a reason for a public scandal. Mayer would summon her to his office and scream, calling her a fat pig, threatening that her career would end right then if she didn't stop gorging. By gorging, he meant a simple apple or an extra slice of bread. This psychological abuse led Judy to develop a severe eating disorder. She began to hate food, seeing it as an enemy that could rob her of the public's love. The studio deliberately destroyed her connection with her own body, turning her into a biological mechanism that had to be thin, bright, and obedient. In The Wizard of Oz, there are moments where Judy looks unusually fresh and joyful, but look closer into her eyes in the scenes where she sings her famous "Over the Rainbow." There is no childhood joy there, only a frozen fear. Fear of missing a note, fear of swaying from weakness, fear of Mayer, who watched her every move from the shadows of the pavilion. Hollywood demanded she be a symbol of hope for an entire nation, while she herself lived in a state of permanent exhaustion. She was a dazzling star in the MGM sky, but that star burned not from an inner light, but because she was being systematically burned alive. In this block, we see how the last vestiges of human dignity were stripped from Judy, replaced by an eternal, paralyzing sense of inadequacy. She became the greatest actress of her time, but the price of that greatness was completely destroyed health and a psyche turned to ruins. By the late 1940s, Judy Garland had turned into a living raw nerve. Years of chemical abuse and constant hunger had turned her psyche into a powder keg. She was no longer the obedient girl Mayer could intimidate with a shout. Inside her, a massive, uncontrollable protest grew, manifesting as panic attacks. Imagine the world's highest-paid star sitting in her dressing room, shaking so violently that the makeup artist couldn't apply a base, her heart pounding in the rhythm of amphetamine madness. She feared the light. The sound stages that had once been her home now felt like torture chambers. She began arriving late for shoots, 5, 6, 10 hours late. But this wasn't a star's whim, it was paralyzing fear. She physically could not force her feet to take a step toward the camera. The darkest moments of her life were turned into secret archives by MGM. When Judy's despair reached its peak, she committed acts that were the only available way for her to say, "Enough, I can't take it anymore." We won't go into graphic details, but let's be blunt. Garland repeatedly tried to end her journey. In 1950, when she was suspended from filming once again, she locked herself in a bathroom and tried to permanently silence the voice of Dorothy within her. What did the studio do? They didn't call a psychiatrist. They didn't give her a year of leave. They called PR people to hush the scandal and doctors to apply stitches that could be hidden under a high-collared dress. Within days, she was pushed back onto the stage. She was forced to sing of happiness while her soul was torn to shreds. It was the ultimate cynicism. Hollywood needed her song, but Hollywood didn't give a damn about her pain. To fix their gold mine, MGM and the doctors of the time resorted to methods that today seemed like medieval barbarism. In those years, psychiatry knew no soft approaches. Judy was subjected to sessions meant to reboot her brain. After such procedures, she would lose her memory and coordination for days, but the studio viewed this as an acceptable price for making her more compliant. She began to feel like a ghost. Hallucinations, triggered by a cocktail of drugs and exhaustion, became her constant companions. The studio walls seemed to close in on her, and the people around her were mere shadows seeking to drink her voice. She became a hostage to her own talent. The whole world wanted to hear her sing, but no one wanted to hear her cry. Her body began to fail. Constant weight fluctuations caused by hormonal imbalances from the pills left Judy's skin painfully pale and her hair falling out in clumps. To hide this, makeup artists spent 5 hours creating an illusion of life on her face. She was like a porcelain doll glued back together piece by piece. During this period, she often snapped at colleagues, screamed, threw things, and the press immediately seized on it, painting a portrait of an unstable bitch. But no one wrote that this woman was living in a hell they had created for her. Every appearance on stage was a feat no one asked for and a sacrifice no one appreciated. The most terrifying part of this chapter in her life was her absolute loneliness. Judy was surrounded by assistants, managers, husbands, and fans, but not one of them saw her as a human being. To everyone, she was a function, a tool for earning money, or a way to bask in someone else's fame. When she tried to speak about her condition, she was called dramatic. When she was silent, she was considered arrogant. This block is a testament to how an industry can consume a person, leaving only a beautiful shell and a voice recorded on film. Judy Garland was a scream that Hollywood turned into a symphony, forcing the entire world to applaud her agony. We are approaching the moment when the star finally flickered out, unable to withstand her own brilliance, which was merely a reflection of the spotlights aimed at her eyes. Judy Garland's personal life was never about love. It was an endless series of attempts to find someone to protect her from the monsters of her past. But the irony of fate was that every new man in her bed turned out to be a monster himself. At 19, trying to escape the iron heel of her mother and MGM Studios, Judy married musician David Rose. She naively believed that a ring on her finger would grant her freedom, but Hollywood had no intention of letting go of its primary property. When Judy became pregnant, her mother and Louis B. Mayer conspired to commit a crime against her will. She was forced to terminate the pregnancy because Dorothy cannot be a mother. David Rose did not stand in her defense. He watched in silence as the studio dismantled her wife's physical and psychological health. This moment broke the woman in Judy forever. She realized that even a legal husband was just another overseer working for the corporation. Her second marriage to the great director Vincente Minnelli seemed like a union of titans. It was he who created her best screen images, polishing her talent like a diamond. But behind the closed doors of their Beverly Hills home, a drama worthy of Shakespeare was unfolding. Minnelli was in love with the camera and with aesthetics, but he was absolutely cold to the living woman sitting before him. Judy felt she was merely a good angle to him, a prop in his flawless sets. He demanded perfection on screen, but could not endure her withdrawals and depression in reality. Liza was born of this marriage, and Judy desperately tried to be a good mother. But how can you give love when you are empty inside? Minnelli did not hide his disappointment with her instability. He would go to the studio, leaving her alone in a massive house where she slowly went mad from loneliness, mixing alcohol with sleeping pills. This marriage taught her the main lesson: creators only love your success, but they are the first to abandon you when you start to drown. And then Sid Luft entered her life, a man who promised her the world but ended up leaving her in the ashes. Luft was a professional manipulator. He became her manager and took total control of her career. Yes, he organized her triumphant return in A Star Is Born, but the price of that return was slavery. Sid was a pathological gambler. While the world applauded Judy at Carnegie Hall, her husband was blowing tens of thousands of dollars in the underground casinos of Las Vegas. He created an information vacuum around her. He convinced her that everyone else was an enemy and only he wished her well. It was a classic golden cage. When Judy tried to protest, he reminded her that she was just a junkie he had pulled from the gutter. He systematically destroyed the remnants of her pride to keep her working like a clockwork machine. By the time they divorced, Judy found her tax debts amounted to hundreds of thousands of dollars, and all her earnings from years of hard labor had simply vanished into her husband's pockets. She was left a legend with an empty wallet. Judy's final years are a chronicle of a descent into the abyss, accompanied by men who can hardly be called human. Mark Herron was merely a passing episode, a shadow basking in the rays of her fading fame. But the real finale came with Mickey Deans. He was younger, more energetic, and more cynical than all the others. Deans met her when she was at her most vulnerable, penniless, homeless, and hounded by creditors. He positioned himself as a savior, but in reality he was just a scavenger flying toward the scent of impending death. They married in London 3 months before her end. The wedding was pathetic. Almost none of her star friends attended, because everyone understood it was a farce. Judy was in such a state she barely knew where she was, while Deans was already negotiating interviews and book deals about living with a legend. The most shocking scandal of this period was Garland's total poverty. Imagine a woman whose songs are sung by all of America, forced to perform in the talk of the town cabaret for pittance to pay her hotel bills. The audience was cruel. People didn't come to see her talent, they came to see her collapse. They laughed when she forgot the lyrics, they threw bread rolls at her when she missed the notes. And all this time, Mickey Deans sat in the bar waiting for the show to end so he could take her check. In their London flat, there was no proper heating. Judy, who once lived in luxury estates with servants, now washed her own clothes in the sink and pawned her last stage jewelry to buy a bottle of wine and a pack of pills. She was abandoned by everyone. Her children were far away. Her friends from the Golden Age chose to forget her existence to avoid seeing the shame. She was a queen without a kingdom, a lonely woman freezing in a foreign city. Why did she let this happen to her? The answer lies in that very chemistry she was hooked on in childhood. Judy could not function without external validation. Her husbands gave her the illusion that she was still needed. They used her fear of loneliness as a weapon. Each of them knew that saying a few kind words was enough for her to give up everything: her voice, her money, the remnants of her health. She was the victim of a perfect exploitation system. First, the studio squeezed the youth out of her, and then her beloved men gnawed away the rest. Her life is a parable about how dangerous it is to be too talented, in a world where talent is just a resource to be monetized and discarded. We see a woman who sang of love her whole life, but never knew what it was like to be loved for herself, not for her ability to go on stage and win applause. It was a total scorched desert of feelings through which Judy Garland walked barefoot till her very last breath.